When I think of the cross, I think of the insults and the mockery that came from the crowd. I think of a painful 39 lashes and the excruciating pain from a thorn-filled crown. When I think of the cross, I think of brutal suffering and the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus willingly stepped into. You see, the greatest act of love is for the innocent to stand in place for the guilty. And that's exactly what Jesus did when he stood in place for you and me. It's what we call grace. And in a moment of grace, far beyond anything that we could ever comprehend, Jesus took on all our anger, all our anxiety, all our brokenness, all our pain, all our past, every single mistake, all our shame. He took on all the things that we try to carry, but they're just so heavy. But Jesus didn't come just to simply take those things. He came to give us freedom. Because of him, you're no longer lost to your past. Because of him, you're no longer a slave to your shame. Because of him, you're no longer a prisoner to your pain. Because of him, you're no longer bound to your sin. Because of Jesus, we can actually take these things and lay them down at the foot of the cross. See, God's love has liberated us, you and me, free to forever walk in the light of his amazing grace.
Well, hey there, Elevate friends and family. Great to have you with us today for Easter Sunday with Elevate. And listen, as we get started, full disclosure, I am one of those people who's crazy enough to believe the Easter story is not a fairy tale. Crazy enough to believe that 2,000 years ago, a guy named Jesus died very publicly on a cross, was buried in a tomb that was inescapable, and in fact rose from the dead, that he, while he was here on earth, was in fact God in a bod, and that he still rules and reigns today. And because he rules and reigns today, he can lead and guide your life and my life if we let him. And here's the deal. My faith isn't a blind faith. It's not based on hype. It's not based on wishful thinking. It's actually based on eyewitness testimony of hundreds of people who witnessed Jesus walking the earth, having come back from the dead, been resurrected. And I want to put it to you that if Jesus can overcome death, then he can help you overcome anything that you're facing, that he wants to actually make a difference in your life and also set you up so that you can make a difference in the lives of other people, give you more purpose and more meaning. So here's the thing. Speaking of eyewitnesses, let's go back to the first Easter Sunday. If you've got your smartphone camera or scanner, scan this flow code, and it's going to take you to Luke chapter 24. Now, while you're doing that, let me give you some context. Luke's account of the first Easter Sunday is actually in his biographical account of Jesus' life and ministry. Luke's one of the four remaining biographies that we have access to. And Luke, unlike the other three biographers, he wasn't one of Jesus' followers while Jesus was alive on earth. In fact, he was a medical doctor. And after this supposed resurrection, the stories about Jesus, the impact and influence of Jesus continue to grow and spread. And Luke kind of got the idea that someone should really get about verifying this stuff by talking to eyewitnesses. And secondly, if it is actually true, we'd better write this down, because if this is true, then this changes everything. Now, some of the eyewitnesses that he was able to record were the eyewitnesses of an empty tomb, of Jesus' resurrection. So here's what had happened. On Friday, Jesus had been publicly put to death, capital punishment, crucified on a cross. He'd been buried inside a tomb. A rock had been rolled to seal that tomb. And on the Sunday, some of the women who were followers of Jesus, they went first thing in the morning to the tomb with the idea that they would begin to prepare Jesus' physical body for burial according to Jewish religious custom. When they got there, they noticed that discovered that the stone covering the tomb had been rolled away, and they effectively stumbled across two men, or what looked like men, but they were like glowing and radiant. And so Luke records that the women were terrified and bowed with their faces to the ground. But then the men asks, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? No, he isn't here. He is risen from the dead." This slice of history right here, recorded by Luke, is the basis, the foundation for the Christian faith, that Jesus is alive. And if this is true, then because Jesus is alive, he can actually cause you and me to also be fully alive. Now, I won't bore you with the why, but here's the deal. Over the last few months, I've been geeking out on new car innovations. You know, the EV market is going crazy, but there's just like cars are becoming like technological kind of ecosystems within themselves. And I'm stumbling across some crazy stuff that's just blowing my mind. For example, BYD, Chinese EV manufacturer, who have become like the largest vehicle sales in most countries. Anyway, does anybody here have a problem with parallel parking? Or you're married to someone who struggles with parallel parking? Well, BYD, with all of their sensors and so on and so forth, they've got a couple of models that have solved the challenges with parallel parking. One of the models, you kind of point the nose into the spot and it spins the two rear wheels and slides and you're done, like hands-free. Another one, slightly more expensive model, you just pull up alongside the empty car bay and BYD, the car crab walks into the spot, you hands-free. Yeah, I know. And there's plenty more. I won't get into it too much. It's not kind of why we're here. But here's one development in the car world that you may or may not be aware of. Did you know that car makers are progressively doing away with the spare tire or the spare wheel? Now, I remember my first car, a Holden Kingswood, classic. The spare wheel that was in the boot, it would take like 3 people to just lift that thing out. Well, I guess that's part of the problem, because now approximately 1/3 of all new cars sold come without a spare wheel. And you might not even be aware of this. I mean, look, we're meant to, when we go on a long trip, we're meant to check all the tires. They got the pressure, meant to check that the spare is inflated and the jack is in there. But, come on, who does that? You might not have a spare tire in the rear of your car and not even know it. But then there's a whole range of automakers. They've kind of settled for middle ground. They don't want the big, bulky spare wheels that we've always had. And they're thinking maybe it's a bridge too far for now to not have any spare wheel. So they've come up with this thing. Here it is. It's called, in Australia, the Space Saver Wheel. Anybody seen these on a vehicle in the wild? Anybody knowingly have one of these in the boot of their car? Has anybody ever put one on and driven around? Or maybe right now you've got one on driving around. Here's the thing. Not only do they look ridiculous, they are intentionally designed to merely be a temporary solution. For example, there's speed limits. You are recommended to not travel over 80 kilometers an hour. Secondly, they're only meant to last a few hundred kilometers, and you certainly are not meant to drive that distance in one go with a space saver tire on. So essentially, they're temporary, and because they're suboptimal. At the risk of drawing a very long bow with this metaphor, I want to put it to you that the resurrection points to the reality that Jesus wants to help move you beyond some of the suboptimal areas in your life. Like, too many people are trying to journey through life on a space saver wheels. But Jesus doesn't want to just give you like a temporary patch up. No, the resurrection points to the idea that Jesus wants to give us new life. And not just new life, he also wants to give us new hope. Not the sort of hope that Frio Dockers fans hold on to. No, real hope. In fact, listen to this. This is just a great reminder of how big a deal hope, life, and hope is. In the new part of the Bible, we call it the New Testament, the word hope is used 71 times. 70 of those 71 times, it's used after Jesus' resurrection, because he wants to give us new life and new hope. Now, these women who discovered, the angels said, like, they were angels, the two men who were glowing, they were angels. Come on in, have a look. So the women poked their heads into the tomb. Sure enough, nobody. Jesus isn't there. Well, naturally that blew their minds. So they just ran back to where they'd been in hiding and reported what they'd seen, or, effectively also what they hadn't seen, Jesus' body. Well, unsurprisingly, not everyone was buying it. So Luke recorded this reaction. But the story sounded like nonsense to the men. So they didn't believe it. Okay, well, that happens today. However, Peter jumped up and ran to the tomb to look for himself. Stooping, he peered in and he saw the empty linen wrappings. Then he went home again, wondering what had happened. So just like today, 2,000 years ago, this story that someone died, was buried, came back from the dead, sounded like nonsense to them back then, just like it sounds like nonsense to many people today. But I want to encourage you, be like Peter. Peter thought it was nonsense. He wasn't buying it, but it seems like he had some notion of, if this is true, then this changes everything. So to Peter's credit, he took it upon himself to investigate it. And maybe the greatest gift you can give to yourself this Easter, if you're not buying it, if you're not sure what you believe about Jesus, if this sounds like a fairy tale, maybe the greatest gift you can give to yourself is to be like Peter and just start to investigate it. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to have all the answers. But again, I want to put it to you that if the eyewitness accounts that are recorded by Matthew, Mark, John, and Luke after the fact, if they're true, if these eyewitnesses are telling the truth, then this changes everything. And just for the record, Peter went from being in hiding after Jesus' death to going to the tomb and exploring and wondering and investigating for himself. Jesus ultimately reappeared to Peter and to hundreds of others. Peter knew this was the reality. This was the facts. There was no escaping this. Jesus came back from the dead and ultimately gave his own life, was put to death for making it his mission to tell other people that Jesus is risen. So friends, happy Easter to you. We love the chocolates. We love the bunnies. We love all the things. But the most important piece is this fact: Jesus is risen.